What's new from Apple? There's the new iPhone 16 Pro, built for Apple Intelligence. And it comes with the all-new camera control, giving you an easier way to quickly access your camera tools. The new Apple Watch Series 10 has our biggest display and our thinnest design ever. And this? It's the sound of active noise cancellation, now available on one of 2 new AirPods 4 models. So quiet. Check out all of the new products and new features at apple.com. You can even buy yourself something new. See apple.com for product availability updates. Apple Intelligence coming this fall.
This is what you do when you've just found that statement handbag on eBay and you want to build an entire wardrobe around it. You start selling to keep buying. Yep, on eBay. Over that all-black everything phase? List it and buy all the color. Feeling more vintage than ever? It's out with the new and in with the pre-loved. Next thing you know, you've refreshed your wardrobe basically without spending a dime. Yeah, eBay, the place to buy and sell new, pre-loved, vintage, and rare fashion.
Deep in the African wilderness, a young Indiana Jones will learn many lessons on this expedition he finds himself on. Lessons in nature, in firearms, and in death and the circle of life. And he'll be meeting some very interesting historical figures along the way. Welcome to the Indiana Jones Lorecast, where we delve into the lore and the history of the Indiana Jones franchise. Hello everyone, and welcome to the show. Today we will be covering the second TV film or episode from the Adventures of Young Indiana Jones series. This episode is titled Passion for Life, and I think we're just gonna hop right into it, so let's go. Our story opens up with the sun rising over the African wilderness. We get shots of some of the animals which are running around and grazing, and through this wilderness, a train makes its way down a solitary track, and on the front of this train sits 2 men and a young boy. The young boy is, of course, Indiana Jones, 10 years of age in this story. He stares in amazement as he, his father, and the other man spot many different animals. And this is something that is seen quite often when Africa is depicted on TV and film. Sure, you see all the iconic African animals when you go there, but it's always made to seem like if you go to the African wilderness, you will literally see every single species all at once. You would have giraffes, zebras, and lions all doing the can-can, shoulder to shoulder. It's just pretty funny to see. So, the year is 1909, and the Jones family has travelled to British East Africa, a region which is now Kenya. They arrive at a camp that they will be staying at. It is not a small camp, mind you. There are dozens of people here. This is an expedition which has been sponsored by the Smithsonian Institute. Theodore Roosevelt is on this expedition, being an avid and highly experienced outdoorsman, hunter, and the former US president, as I'm sure you all know. But yes, he is not the president during the events of this story. At this point, his presidency has already come and gone. The purpose of this expedition is to hunt specimen and transport them back to America, where they can be displayed in the National Museum in Washington. Mr. Roosevelt is not in camp at the moment, but is to return that evening. In the meantime, Indy is given a tour around the camp, and he meets a man named Heller, who is a taxidermist. And something to note here is that there are so many characters that Indy meets in this show who are actually real people. This taxidermist is a good example. Dr. Edmund Heller was a real guy, and he was a taxidermist for the Smithsonian Institute. And even though he only appears very briefly in the episode, it's an authentic name. So, of course, we will not go over each and every real person that he meets, because we'll be here all day, but it is something that's definitely worth noting. Very cool. When Indy meets Heller, he is working on a lioness, and Indy looks into the eyes of the dead animal and strokes its face, clearly feeling sad and empathizing with it. Later on, we see that Indy's mother has climbed into one of the outdoor showers and is busy cleaning herself. From a short distance away, Indy's father sees this and gets a naughty look on his face and slinks off. He gets a bucket of cold water and begins sneaking up on the shower, but what he didn't see is that while he was doing this, his wife had left the showers, and Miss Seymour, Helen Seymour, had now begun showering in the same place, effectively replacing his wife. So he sneaks up and is stopped just short of dunking the water when Miss Seymour luckily looks over the shower wall just in time and then asks him what he's doing. And of course, it's a rather awkward interaction. He's just kind of struck kind of dumb standing there with the bucket, and he just kind of backs away and apologizes. And she just kind of shakes her head and says, "Ridiculous boy." And I enjoyed that moment there. I really did, because it becomes clear where Indy gets that same streak from. It's clearly genetic or something. Also, his father is usually quite stiff and proper. That's mainly the role he plays in these episodes, hardly smiling. So it was nice to see this other side shine through. That afternoon, Indy is exploring around the camp and sees members of a local tribe herding animals. Among the shepherds is a young boy who looks to be about his age. He waves at the boy, but the boy just kind of stares back at him with this confused look on his face, probably wondering who this strange, pale little boy is. And that's what his face says anyway. Indy is called back to camp at this point, however, because Mr. Roosevelt has returned. His hunting party are carrying their kills for that day, and Roosevelt is having pictures taken. Indy meets a man named AngloZulu, a British explorer and hunter. Again, was a real guy. But what is interesting about this character is that he is played by the actor Paul Freeman, who also played Belloc in Raiders of the Lost Ark. So it's very odd to see the same actor in a different role in the franchise. There is no in-universe link between the two characters, though you might be led to think that. That's not the case. The sun sets on the campsite as the locals are all singing around their fires, and the Joneses join Roosevelt and his hunting party at their dinner table. The party sit at the table discussing the fact that they cannot seem to find a particular animal for the museum, a rare fringe-eared oryx. As they are discussing this, however, a lion is heard roaring a short distance away in the bush, and everyone is of course a little unsettled. AngloZulu reaches for his rifle just in case, and he says that earlier that day he had shot a lioness, and Roosevelt says that he shot that lioness's mate, but was only able to wound it, unfortunately, as it got away. Now, let me tell you, to hear a lion's roar in the African bush at night is amazing and terrifying. It's definitely quite an experience, but not only is this a lion in the African bush at night, but it is also a wounded lion, so that's just fantastic. Roosevelt recounts a story of a hunter who wounded a lion that he knew of, and this lion later entered the camp and smelt him out, specifically found him. So this story has everyone even more uneasy than before, and perhaps most afraid of everyone is young Indy, standing there with his eyes wide. Excuse me. Allergic to lions. Roosevelt then asks Indy if he has ever fired a gun, and Indy's mother chimes in, saying that he's only 10, but Roosevelt says that, when he was 10 years old, he already had an intimate knowledge of firearms, and he says that tomorrow he will teach Indy how to fire a gun. How cool is that? Probably one of my favorite pieces of information to come out of this series is the fact that Indiana Jones was first taught how to fire a gun by Teddy Roosevelt. That's amazing. Indy spends that night jumping at every sound as he lies awake with a little knife, just in case the lion shows up, no doubt. The next day we see the firearm lesson taking place, with Roosevelt showing Indy how to operate several different guns, which are laid out on the table. He also teaches him that a gun should only be used in order to survive. Just a really great time, and sound advice. Before leaving on that day's hunt, Roosevelt also gifts Indy a pair of binoculars, which is also amazing, and leaves with his party then. As they are riding off, Indy asks Miss Seymour if she would like to go on the hunt, Not that they're gonna go, he's just saying like, oh, wouldn't it be great to go on the hunt? And she actually says that she would like to go. So that's also cool. We again see that she certainly has a very adventurous side. Throughout that day, Indy goes exploring and meets that young boy again, and this time actually speaks to him. They cannot understand each other, of course, but they manage to give each other their names. The young boy's name is Meto, and Meto shows Indy all of the things throughout the plains. They see all sorts of things. They see a rhino, hippos, and lastly a lioness. They were less excited to see that one. And as they are running for their lives, it luckily begins chasing a wildebeest and tackles it to the ground. So a very narrow escape, and Indy does not even mention this to anyone when he gets back to camp later. Speaking of, if I knew that there was a wounded lion about the place, any young children would not even be allowed to leave my sight. Not for 1 second. I mean, I don't know where Meto's parents or elders are. He's kind of just around, but I don't know how Miss Seymour or Indy's parents even let him leave the camp. Anyway, back at camp, Indy sees the new kills from that day's hunt when the hunting party returns, and he asks Roosevelt why they are taking so many of them if the animals are so rare. And Roosevelt makes the case that the purpose of doing this is to get animals into museums for everyone to see, so they might come to understand and respect nature, and that in the grand scheme of things, the few that they are hunting will not make much difference. He tells Indy that he counts few achievements higher than his founding of the national parks. He of course did this in order to preserve nature. Humans have the ability to completely destroy nature, and that, as he says, is something we must never be allowed to do. That night, the two of them sit playing a board game. They are further discussing the matter of hunting when a gunshot is heard from inside the camp. The whole camp descends upon the spot where it came from to find AngloZulu standing over a dead lion, the wounded mate that was mentioned before. It had just charged him. He, however, had his rifle on him. So ends the wounded lion debacle. It's just nice to know that there's not some lion suffering needlessly out in the bush. So that's at least some peace of mind. The next day, Indy goes to spend time with Meto again. And he shows him a sketch that he had made of the fringe-eared ox, to see if he knows, perhaps, where they are. Meto seems to understand what he's asking, and takes him to try and find the animal. Indy is trying to find the oryx for Roosevelt, as nobody has been able to find one yet. Indy and Meto go searching throughout the day, and Meto brings Indy eventually to his village, where he's brought to meet an elder who draws pictures in the sand to sort of illustrate to Indy what he's trying to explain to him. And it is here that Indy understands what happens to the oryx. He also learns a valuable lesson on habitats and environments. What happened was there was a great bushfire at some point, which killed all the snakes. The mole rat survived this fire by burrowing underground. With no snakes left to eat the mole rats, there came to be so many of them that they ate all of the root melons which grow underground. The fringe-eared oryx also eats these same root melons. So this change in the environment and lack of food forced the oryx to move to a new area to feed. Very interesting, but while Indy was going on this little adventure of his parents and Miss Seymour are panicking and going off their heads because they cannot find him, and so raise the alarm with the others. Roosevelt and his party spend hours looking for Indy long into the night. Everyone's obviously very worried, and when Indy finally returns to camp, everyone is very relieved, and very upset at him, naturally. He goes to bed that night very sad. But Meto then enters his tent in the middle of the night and calls him. He wants him to follow him. He eventually agrees, and in the early hours of that morning, Meto leads him to the spot, and they continue searching and eventually find the fringe-eared oryx. They see a whole herd of them grazing in a field. That same morning, while everyone is sitting at the dining table, Indy arrives and tells everyone that he and Meto had found the oryx. Everyone is shocked by this, of course. He shows his journal to Roosevelt, where he had written down the whole reason for them moving. He is very impressed by this, as is everyone else, and Indy says that he did promise to find the oryx for him, and so he has kept his promise. Roosevelt pretty much immediately tells his party to saddle up, as they all travel to the location of the oryx. Upon seeing them, Roosevelt and the other hunters begin firing at the herd. Once 2 of the oryx had fallen, Indy then kind of jumps in and he stops Roosevelt from shooting anymore. And at first, it's a very tense scene, and Roosevelt is very flustered and frustrated by this as he watches the rest of the herd get away, but he then takes a breath and agrees with the decision Indy had made, saying that, well, who knows which other animals depend on the oryx in their circle of life. And so we see that the expedition after this has come to an end. We see that the campsite has been entirely packed up, and as the party all leaves, we see Meto sitting up on a hill, watching them go, with a pair of binoculars, the same pair of binoculars from earlier. It seems that Indy gave them to him when they parted ways off screen. That is very sweet, but if Theodore Roosevelt gave me something like that, I don't know if I would have given it away. Actually, what am I saying? I definitely would not have given it away, but anyway, moving on. The Joneses then board a boat sometime later and leave Africa. They are now heading to Paris next, and Indy's father tells him that he should have quite the cultural experience there, studying everything from painting to the ballet, and Indy looks less than interested in this. And as their ship arrives in Nice and they take a train to Paris, we are going to quickly hop over to the mid-break.
This is what you do when you've just found that statement handbag on eBay and you want to build an entire wardrobe around it. You start selling to keep buying. Yep, on eBay. Over that all-black everything phase? List it and buy all the color. Feeling more vintage than ever? It's out with the new and in with the pre-loved. Next thing you know, you've refreshed your wardrobe basically without spending a dime. Yeah, eBay, the place to buy and sell new, pre-loved, vintage, and rare fashion.
This episode is brought to you by Stars. Lisa Tadeo's best-selling book is about to become your favorite new show. Based on a true story, the new Stars original series 3 Women stars Shailene Woodley as Gia, a grieving and struggling writer who embarks on a cross-country road trip where she meets 3 women determined to radically change their lives. This one is not to be missed. Watch the season premiere of 3 Women now, only on Stars and the Stars app.
Earning your degree online doesn't mean you have to go about it alone. At Capella University, we're here to support you when you're ready. From enrollment counselors who get to know you and your goals, to academic coaches who can help you form a plan to stay on track. We care about your success and are dedicated to helping you pursue your goals. Going back to school is a big step, but having support at every step of your academic journey can make a big difference. Imagine your future differently at capella.edu.
Snakes. Why did it have to be snakes?
Why hello there, and welcome to the mid-break. This is just a short segment in the middle of each episode for me to discuss a few things about the show itself and any other relevant info you might want to know about. Firstly, I'm Kel, or Sir Bandit, the host of the show. If you're enjoying the show, you can leave a rating wherever you're listening, that helps a lot. And you can also leave a review saying what you're enjoying about the show. If you leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, I will be reading it out in a future episode. If you'd like to get in contact with me or ask any questions, all contact details will be in the episode description. But that will be all for this mid-break, so with all that being said, let's get back to the story.
I'm going after that truck. Oh. I don't know. I'm making this up as I go.
The train arrives in Paris, and Indy's father, of course, has a busy schedule with the tour that he's on. so Indy's parents will again be gone for pretty much their whole time in Paris. This leaves Indy and Miss Seymour together again for him to be tutored and also for them to explore the city. Indy's father suggested that they start by visiting the Louvre Museum, and they do so. There they get to see the Mona Lisa, which is very cool, and as they stand admiring it, a young boy in his teens approaches them and introduces himself as Norman Rockwell. He was a well-known American painter and illustrator. Not at the time of the story, of course. When Indy meets him, he is simply a young, aspiring artist. Rockwell accompanies them on their walk around the museum, and afterwards they then go and see a puppet show in a small theatre, and the two boys are not finding this very entertaining. So once the show ends, they say to Miss Seymour that she can return to the hotel and they'll stay for a second showing of the puppet show, and they'll join her afterwards. And she reluctantly agrees to this and leaves for the hotel. I don't know why she trusts any of these ideas anymore, but anyway. The boys, of course, do not stay at the theatre. They leave to go to a place that Rockwell says is the place where the real artists hang out. It is in a more dodgy and dangerous part of the city, an underground kind of cafe. This cafe is full, and full of music as well. Very busy place. They find seats and then instantly overhear a man at a nearby table. This is an older man with long white hair and a white beard. His name is Edgar Degas, a famous painter. They had just seen some of his pieces in the museum, as a matter of fact, so very, very well known. And he is also seen to be the founder of the Impressionism movement. Anyway, he is arguing with a younger man who wants his paintings put into the museum. Degas does not think that they are good enough. This young man is quite passionate, quite upset, and quite loud. Degas eventually leaves, when the argument kind of dies down, and after he does so, the young man badmouths him. This upsets Rockwell, who speaks up, telling him that he shouldn't talk that way about Degas because he is a brilliant painter. This man then stands up and walks up to the two boys' table and lifts up his sweater to show that he has a gun. And Indy's like, okay, I'd better get back to the hotel, but Rockwell stops him from trying to move or escape. Probably out of caution, because there's this man just glaring at the two of them over the table. This man leans forward, puts his hands on the table, and offers for the boys to come to his studio to see for themselves that he can paint just as good, if not better, than Degas. Indy asks if he can just finish his omelette, but the man refuses. This man then introduces himself as Pablo Picasso. So, yes, it is plainly obvious that this is a weird fellow. At his studio, the boys watch him work. He is trying to follow Degas' method of painting to prove his point. He first paints a woman on a canvas, and then tosses that canvas aside and starts it again, but this time with his eyes closed. There is another man at the studio named George Brock, another painter and sculptor. He asks Rockwell if he likes Picasso's paintings. Rockwell is looking around the studio at Picasso's other paintings and portraits, all with a distinct geometric style. If you know what Picasso's paintings look like, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. Rockwell says that he likes them very much, but he just wishes Picasso would paint like Picasso instead of trying to paint like Degas. He is clearly very appreciative of the style that he's seen here. The boys are shown more pieces in the studio, Cubism, the newest of the new, as it's called. When Rockwell remarks that they don't look real, he is told, well, is it the job of an artist to make everything absolutely real? Is it not exciting, this idea for an artist to make you feel, to see beyond? This is all very inspiring for the boys. Though their coming here had begun quite confrontationally, they have certainly found a respect for Picasso and his style. Rockwell even sketches a small replica of one of the larger paintings he sees. Picasso then enters the room holding the painting he'd just done. It would seem that he very much can paint like Degas. He is very talented. He sees Rockwell's sketch that he had done and praises him for it, saying that he could have done no better himself, and then signs the paper. Now, I'm sure nobody in the room could have guessed the value of something like that at the time, but later down the line, you can imagine a Norman Rockwell illustration signed by Picasso. Like, gosh. Picasso hands the paper back to Rockwell, rubs his hands together, and then declares, "I'm hungry," and just takes them all out to go eat. Just like that. In the meantime, we see that a police inspector has arrived at the hotel, because Miss Seymour is in a panic. Obviously, Indy is missing. Again. This inspector comes in, declares that he can speak perfect English, and then says that he is an expert kidnapper of children. Okay, well, one of those claims he just made has to be false, and I hope it's the latter. Picasso takes the boys to a large and lively club and restaurant with live dancing and instruments. Very fun looking. He also picks up some ladies of the night to accompany them, just for the sake of them all having fun dancing and eating, nothing more. They arrive at the restaurant, and Picasso is given a model airplane which came from the French inventor Louis Belriot, and this is payment apparently for a painting that he had done at some point. They all begin dancing and having fun, but back out on the streets, the men who had the woman out there working, I'm unsure if pimp is the correct word. It seems incorrect in the scenario somehow, but I suppose that's what they are. They find that Picasso had taken the ladies off the street to go to the restaurant, and they of course aren't happy about this. They follow them and arrive at the restaurant, and, well, a fight breaks out. A massive all-out brawl, in fact. Tables are being turned over, people are dropping left and right. There are some real meaty, impacty, punching sound effects playing. This feels more akin to some other Indiana Jones stories now. The model airplane is also thrown at someone's head at some point. It is just chaos. Picasso also fires his gun into the ceiling with glee, shouting that he loves this town. Again, clearly of sound mind, certainly. The group then leaves, as I'm sure you can imagine. Once in a quieter spot out in the streets, they sit and discuss art further, with Picasso saying that if he were to paint a wild horse, you might not see the horse, but you will definitely see the wildness. What he's trying to do is give spirit form. It is honestly a really cool discussion. The two boys part ways with Picasso at this point and agree to meet him again the next night, and as they head for the hotel, Indy's time with Picasso has clearly changed his perception of the world around him somewhat, as he says that the city streets around them look different to him now. And the two boys are also accosted by those two pimps from earlier again, but manage to escape through a cemetery. When Indy arrives back at the hotel, he does a bit of a sneaky thing here. He manages to sneak into the room and finish his assignment that Miss Seymour had given him. He then hides inside the cupboard and waits till morning for her to find him. When she does, she kind of lets out a scream, and he screams as well, and she asks him where he's been. He wasn't in his room, and he says that he had been in the cupboard the whole night, studying and finishing his assignment, and he must have fell asleep. He was doing this in the cupboard because it was quiet, and, he asks if she's going to punish him, and she says no. But what she does do is give him a mountain of books to study for that whole day, with instructions that he is not to leave the room. That night, however, he was obviously supposed to meet with Picasso. A real shame. I guess he can't now, so he sees himself to bed, and that's the end of it. No, of course he doesn't do that. He climbs out the window and literally has to climb around balconies and rooftops to get to the streets below. He almost falls to his death doing this. But Miss Seymour is wise to it this time. She doesn't catch him leaving, but finds that Indy had written down the name of the place that they are to meet with him. So she follows. Indy meets with Rockwell in the streets and they head to the party. Upon arriving, they find that it is a costume party, very bright and fun, but Miss Seymour arrives there soon after them, and when she comes in, Indy gets a huge fright when he sees her, and Picasso at this point sees her and narrows his eyes at her and slowly pulls out his gun, saying, "The tutor." It is such a strange and brilliant moment. We then see that Picasso has taken Miss Seymour into a room, and everyone is wondering if she's going to be okay. Inside the room, we see that Miss Seymour is sitting while Picasso draws her onto a piece of paper. He is forcing her to sit there at gunpoint. She is not frightened by the gun though, but she is quite frustrated by the whole thing. He tells her to stay still, or the drawing will frighten both of them. Upon its completion, he tells her to come look, and she is surprised at the skill that is evident on the page. She is very, very impressed. He then pulls the paper off to reveal a second drawing of her in the style of Cubism. She is impressed once again, saying that they are absolutely beautiful. She then is allowed to leave, and he says that the two boys have shown that they love art and that they can learn a lot by spending more time with him, and Miss Seymour tells him that she's not sure the police would agree. And when they eventually leave the room, we see that Picasso meets with a buyer for the painting that he has done, the fake Degas painting. He has a scheme brewing here in order to prove his point to Degas that he can paint as good as he can, and I'm just going to explain this to you. He tells this buyer that the painting is in fact a Degas painting, the one that he did himself. And he says that he feels guilty for charging the buyer such a high price if it isn't signed, because obviously it's not signed because Degas did not do the painting. The buyer just says, oh well, he'll get Degas to sign it, and Picasso's like, great, I'll be there when you do. It is worth noting that Picasso's friends think that this is a cruel plan. They think it's very unnecessary to prove this point in such a way, but he is going ahead with it anyway. The next day, Indy and Rockwell are walking to the cafe where Picasso will execute this grand plan of his, and Rockwell gives Indy the sketch that Picasso had signed as a souvenir of their adventure. That's very cool. At the cafe, the buyer is there, of course, everyone is there, and he asks Degas to sign the painting. Degas looks at it and sort of goes, oh, I must have been tired when I did this one, and he signs the painting. Picasso then pipes up and brags, you see, I did that painting, and Degas couldn't tell it apart from one of his own. The buyer is upset, of course, and he asks the boys to confirm if they did see Picasso paint this. Like, is this true? But the two boys decide to lie at this point. They say that no, they didn't see Picasso paint this. They're of course going against this little idea of his. Picasso is upset, of course, and the boys say that, well, the painting looks like a Degas painting and it is signed by Degas, so who else could it be? Indy, to further prove this point, offers Rockwell's sketch with Picasso's signature to the buyer to purchase, saying that Picasso actually drew this. The buyer is happy to purchase it, but Picasso protests, and he says, well, no, I didn't draw that, but again, it looks like a Picasso piece and is signed by him too, so who else could it be? The price that is settled on is 1,000 francs. The buyer hands the cash to Indy and leaves with his art pieces, feeling quite proud of himself. He feels happy with the deal he got, so Picasso seems to have taken Indy's point to heart and smiles. Indy gives half of the money to Picasso and the other half to Rockwell, and Indy says to Picasso, if I was in Paris longer, I could be your agent. I'd make you rich. And laughing, Picasso picks up Indy and hugs him. And that's the end of their time with him, as we then cut to Indy's parents returning from their trip, meeting Indy and Miss Seymour in a fancy restaurant. They ask what they got up to, but both Indy and Miss Seymour elect to leave out the more colourful parts of the last few days. And as our story closes out, we see them all sitting at the table, talking and drinking tea. And that is the end of this story. Something to remember with the young Indiana Jones stories is the fact that, again, they are very much intended to be educational material, as well as entertainment. This can definitely be seen in episodes like this, a lot less action but packed full of places, people and ideas that were historically and culturally significant. Not the same pace or the same feel as the older indie stories, but still interesting, I think. But the change can be quite jarring to go from one to the other, but these stories are very much worth telling, as these are of course very formative events and adventures that he had in his early life, so still worth covering. Again, loved the whole Theodore Roosevelt thing, and Picasso was certainly a memorable character. You would have to watch the episode yourself to see the performance and truly understand the passion and strangeness behind the character. But that is going to be all for today. Thank you so much for listening to the end, and if you have any questions, you can find me in my office. But until then, remember, if you find yourself asking why Indy's parents don't just tie him to a chair, well, I suppose it's because we would be left with a rather dull story. I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to the Indiana Jones Lorecast. If you like what you hear and want to support the show, then drop a rating or review wherever you're listening. I'll see you next time.